presentation today of the artists that were and their works and creations at the Point Loma Lomaland community from 1897 to 1942. The primary people we're looking at, the primary artists, are Reginald Machell, born in England, came to Lomaland around 1900, famous for his great painting of the path, and did tremendous amount of creative work when at the Lomaland community, both woodworking, carving, artwork, drawings, etc. And also Leonard Lester, also born in England, came to Lomaland very early and was a great artist doing his style of plein air art. And Morris Braun immigrated from Hungary with his parents in the 1870s, and probably the most famous of the Lomaland artists, a California plein air artist as well. And also another artist, Grace Betts, and Marion Plummer Lester, Leonard Lester's wife. So I'll go through these and take questions, and then there may be another PowerPoint if we have time. So here's a colored photograph of the primary buildings at Lomaland. You have the Temple of Peace on the right and the Raja Yoga Academy in the middle, and then on the left is what was the house built for Elizabeth Mayer Spalding, Albert Spalding, the famous sporting goods manufacturer. And that building still remains on the now Point Loma Nazarene College site. So Morris Braun summed it up in the theme "Art for Humanity's Sake." It was Braun's theosophical art motto. So art was not viewed by the Lomaland Theosophists as any kind of commercial commodity, but as a spiritual gift. So they felt that nature's light as a symbol of the immanent spiritual presence pervading all life. So Brown says, let us remember that method, style, subject, and all the rest are merely the clothing in which the thing itself, art, is enclosed. It is the aroma of the message that is important. Let the real aim of art be, therefore, the achievement of inner vision. So here we can already see in this kind of foundation principle, very theosophical view of art as a very internal process of expressing something very essential through different modalities. Essential spirit of things. So Braun also has very interesting history. His parents came from Eastern Europe, from Hungary. They were Jewish refugees, in a sense, to the United States at that time. His father was a tailor in the garment industry. They came to New York. Conditions were rather horrific, tremendous exploitation of workers. A garment worker at the time worked out of their home, were paid per piece. Conditions was very crowded and condensed. And actually, the kind of synchronicity was Morris Braun and family met Catherine Tingley before her involvement in theosophy, when she had what she called her do-good mission, outreach social work mission in New York, which primarily served the immigrant community at the time. So Braun met Tingley when he was 7, 8, 9 years old. There may have been something actually in the apocryphal account that she encouraged him to continue his artwork, which he'd begun doing as a child. 20 years later, full circle, he's went to Chicago Art Institute and studied in New York, went to Europe, and becomes very interested in theosophy and joins the community in Lomaland, or he wants to. And then Catherine Tingley, very unusually, says, "No, I don't think you should live in the community. Why don't you live across the street?" She said, with a special kind of unusual circumstance, your life work is just to do art. If you come to the community, you'll be involved in too many other things. So they had a theater downtown. It was called Isis Theater, had offices and things in it, and he established his studio for art in downtown and started teaching art in San Diego, and then participated in the community on an individual basis as he had time. Here's a very early painting, A Morning Idol by Morris Braun Lomaland, around 1914. I think he arrived in San Diego around 1910, something like that. So this would be on Lomaland. I believe this painting is still extant. If it survived it would be at Theosophical Society, Pasadena. If it survived the recent fire there, I think it probably did. Here's typical vista, Morris Braun in the desert. This is later in the 1930s. He became very closely involved in, more so in the Theosophical Society's organization during the 1930s, where he and his wife were cabinet members of the society. And every year in the later 30s, there would be a road trip, either all the way up to Washington State and back, or all the way across the country to uh, New Mexico, Texas, and back. And Braun would sketch. Iverson Harris would take as secretary to De Perucker, the head of this Theosophical Society, would take dictation. Perucker would write letters and relax a little bit. It was a very stressful time for the community. So it was kind of a Theosophical road trip vacation. And Morris Braun would drive and paint and sketch. So this could be a very typical scene from when they went through the Southwest. Here's Morris Braun painting. He had his home on the across the main avenue across Catalina. I forget which street it was on. Oh, well, close, overlooking the other side of San Diego. More Morris Braun landscape, much of it in San Diego County. Here's a still life he did. He started exploring some still life paintings in the 1930s. When I came across this, I don't have this painting myself, but I was quite surprised because of the objects used in this painting. I should have posted another picture, but the Buddha statue in the painting uh, came from my grandparents, my father's parents, and I still have that Buddha statue. I was quite surprised to see it painted here. So it showed also how connected everybody was. Morris Braun needed some objects. He wanted to do something Buddhist themed. There was a lot of study of Buddhism happening at Lomaland during the 1930s. So it's not surprising that this was put together like that. Another kind of Asian motif style, still life. More art of San Diego County, overlooking the ocean. This is Lomaland, probably looking down a canyon, eucalyptus trees. This painting showed up recently and is in our collection. Rather unusual for Braun in several ways, in that he has an image. I don't know if you can people see my cursor here. Anyway, there's this image looking up of a kind of earth Buddha, I call it.
Oh, yeah.
East County toward in between, somewhere in between Lakeside and Alpine, for those familiar with the area. Turn it sideways here. That I'm imagining this, or is it there? I think it's there. Reginald Machel. So Machel meets Blavatsky in 1886 in London. He was a highly gifted, typical Victorian artist of the time. And as soon as they meet, Blavatsky puts him to work drawing things he'd never thought of drawing up to that time. You know, he painted her room, he painted everything in the lecture hall full of Egyptian symbolist images, changed completely, transformed. This evolved very quickly into his very large canvases he did of a number of paintings, especially his famous is his The Path. He incorporated into his artwork the color palette based on Blavatsky's esoteric understanding of color correspondences. He also did a lot of wood carving, chairs, screens, fine carving, and inlay work. So it's noteworthy that, at least in terms of the design of the Spalding House, the temple, and the academy at Lomaland, undoubtedly his input was involved in the designing of that based on Catherine Tingley's ideas. He did a lot of the interior work, the whole interior of the Spalding House, which is now the administrative building at Point Loma Nazarene College. All the doorways were carved by Machel, with themes on music and children, which Tingley requested because Elizabeth Mayer Spalding had been involved in the children's Lotus schools in Boston. So here's Reginald Machel on the left, 1890s in London, and on the right, much later in Lomaland. As Morris writes in Reginald Machel's obituary, that his studio in London was in Whitechapel, which was a very it was what he could afford. It was on like the fifth floor of a building in Whitechapel. Whitechapel was a very poor, polluted, downtrodden area of London at the time. And he was painting these visionary paintings on the top floor of his studio there. Here's his famous painting of The Path. It's a very large canvas, maybe 8 feet tall. This was used as the main cover design for the Lomaland magazine, The Theosophical Path, from 1911 to 1929. It was on the cover. I think Machel was inspired partly by the paintings of William Blake, the famous English artist and mystic. Blake's had been revived into the awareness of the British public through a publication of 2 volumes on William Blake by William Butler Yeats and in the early 1890s. So here you can see Machel has incorporated symbolism from multiple areas. There's Celtic, Egyptian, European, all kinds of things mixed together and integrated into a whole with his own take on these ideas. He writes a commentary on this we may get to a little later. He also did hundreds of pen and ink drawings for stories. This was from a short story written by Kenneth Morris, uh, and Machel would do the drawings for them. And also for his own, he wrote many short stories himself. These are all short fantasy stories, mythic tales. In carving, he created these chairs and screens and all kinds of things. This was a large chair that he carved for Catherine Tingley that was used at Lomaland. These carvings and chairs are still extant at the Theosophical Society, Pasadena. A huge painting he did, Adam and Eve, in the 1890s, very large scale. I don't know the size, maybe 6, 7 feet tall, something like that. Mm. Wood carved box that Machel did in 1886 shows his symbolist and theosophical influences already happening at the time. It's a small kind of jewelry box.
Sorry, could you please speak louder?
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, here's the wood carved box that Reginald Machel did in 1886, showing different symbol designs. Here's the inside showing a theosophical symbol. Some details on the outside. There's the date inscribed in the bottom with theosophical symbols on the small boxes on the interior. It's on the outside, theosophical interlacing triangles, six-pointed star. It's also taught the students. Here he is in a woodworking class in the early 1900s at Lomaland. He also taught instrument making, and they had a violin workshop at Lomaland also, making violins for the orchestra. There's a water nymph Lakshmi in the 1890s by Reginald Machel, holding a lotus in her right hand. The Celtic dragon he carved for Kenneth Morris. There are many, many more Machel paintings. So we go to Leonard Lester, born in England also 1870. Came to Lomaland in the early 1900s. Lomaland also had schools in Cuba starting in the early 1900s. And Leonard Lester became one of the instructors at the school in Cuba. Actually, they had 5 schools in Cuba from about 1902 to 1912, about 10 years. They finally had to close the schools there due to budget constraints. Insufficient. They spent a lot of money developing them, but couldn't maintain the ongoing. Leonard Lester very much into nature mysticism, nature, art mediums were oil paintings, watercolors, pen and ink, pencil and crayon. Here he is painting probably in the 1940s, maybe 1930s, 40s. After Lomaland, he and his wife Marion lived in the East County of San Diego, near Alpine, and also then in Grossmont area, which was a rural area then, near La Mesa. Early 1920s, there's a moonrise over San Diego Bay from Lomaland looking east. eucalyptus trees at Lomaland. Oil painting, East San Diego County, eucalyptus trees. It's unusual. This is one of the only art pieces from Cuba. This is a Cuban scene. These are, at first I couldn't figure out where is this, and then I realized the trees are from Cuba. Leonard's wife, Marion Plummer Lester, uh, they met at Lomaland. She came to Lomaland as a young child. Her whole family, siblings were involved in theosophy. Well known, her brother Gordon Plummer and her other sister Helen Plummer married Iverson Harris. Marion was very multifaceted in her artwork. Here's some artwork theosophically inspired she did later in the 1970s. This is the cycle of birth and death.
Mm.
Portrait of Gita Perukar by Marion Lester. Perukar became the successor to Catherine Tingley upon her death in 1929 until 1942. Or Fairy Sprites by Marion Lester. Marion had very whimsical, mythic kind of images here. The great painting she did called Avatar and Initiation is full of symbolism of, you can see the astrological planetary alignment and some Sanskrit language there and various devas, birth of a lotus of a new being, this Buddha figure overlooking everything. And we only have a photo of this painting. It's around somewhere. Someone has it, but I don't know where it is. Another artist at Lomaland is Grace Betts. Grace Betts studied at Chicago Art Institute also, came to Lomaland very early. Famous artist family. Her brothers were artists, Harold Betts and Louis Betts. Parents, they're all interested to some degree in theosophy. She was very much interested in the Lomaland community, came to live there. And she also went to Cuba and taught at the schools in Cuba for about 10 years, returned to Lomaland. She was also very much involved in creating stage sets and costuming and acting in the dramatic productions at Lomaland. She did a lot of illustrations. She did the cover for the Raja Yoga Messenger, children's magazine. Cover designs. Illustrated other books. A man named William Nida, who was a professor at San Diego State University, wrote some books for children. Grace Betts did the illustrations for them. Later, after Lomaland, she also lived in the Southwest. She had a Airstream trailer and an old Buick and would move from place to place, painting Southwest Native American scene and people for the most part. She lived that way for quite a long time, maybe 20 or more years. She would travel between Flagstaff and Santa Fe and Tucson. This is from Taos Pueblo, elder. There she is outside where she's has her trailer parked. I'm not sure where exactly. And she continued painting into her 80s, at least, maybe 90 even. There's an earlier landscape she did at Lomaland, probably around 1920. The artist Edith White came to Lomaland, and primarily she was the main art teacher at Lomaland. Like even my father studied art with her growing up. Everyone took art classes. Edith White was great still life floral artist, well known in California. An artist at Lomaland would sign the painting not just with her signature, but also Lomaland Art School. Here's a view looking over San Diego Bay. I think this is not on the side of Lomaland, but closer to the west side. Nature scene at Lomaland. Another artist with Charles J. Ryan came to Lomaland in 1900. He'd been exhibiting in art in England already. He did very little art when he arrived to Lomaland, but he did a few pieces, and he his whole mode shifted at Lomaland, where he primarily did a lot of teaching and writing, especially in science and theosophy. One large painting he did, though, of the temple and academy looking toward the west, that would be a sunrise, not a sunset. We have this painting in our collection here. There's a painting he did in England of a ruined castle. There are a lot of kind of illustrated uh, art pieces. So this was to our teacher of music, Mr. E. August Naresheimer, 1904, with symbols of harp and lotus, hand calligraphed, possibly done by Reginald Machel. All kinds of small cards and larger things were done all the time at Lomaland by hand. As Morris, the Welsh poet and fantasy writer, taught literature Raja Yoga School, uh, had lived in Dublin, became friends with George William Russell, William Butler Yeats, and came to Lomaland. He would hand illustrate some of his poems. So here's one that he did, one of his Chinese poems. I mean, Morris would not consider himself an artist at all, but he did these for his own fun, I guess you'd say. He was a great poet. Ursula Le Guin thought he was, a great fantasist equal to Tolkien. Here's some more. This is again painting by Leonard Lester. Some things don't have an order here. This was unusual because this was an illustrated. This is pre-Lomaland, but I put it in because it's so unique. This is a illustrated signed historic kind of gathering because it's right before the Chicago Parliament of Religions. Theosophical gathering took place of the theosophists that were coming. It's extraordinarily historical because of who did the design work were also the people who signed it, and the people who signed it. This was certainly the one and only time that they all were able to meet in one place together, as history fragmented things after this. So you have these very historic theosophical figures all together at the same time. Top is Gyanendra Chakravarti from India, Dharmapala from Sri Lanka, Annie Besant from England, William Q. Judge from America, Henrietta Mueller, Claude Falls Wright, E. August Naresheimer, Alexandra Fullerton, H.T. Patterson, Ella Judge, that's William Q. Judge's wife, Minnie Naresheimer, Naresheimer's wife, C.T. Strauss, and M. Ralston. But the drawings, it's in Sinhalese, Sanskrit, would have been done by Chakravarti and Dharmapala. Judge would have probably done some of the drawings. He was a fairly good art illustrator. And we don't know exactly who did all of the images and things on it, but it's quite a unique piece of art. Here's a typical nature scene card from Lomaland. It's a smaller, it's probably 4x6. Possibly by Leonard Lester, as it looks like his style. It could have been by any number of people at Lomaland. It's another later card, hand colored in later from the 1930s. This is a quote by Gita Parukar. So the art and drama and music did continue into the 1930s, but it was reduced. It wasn't as robust as during the time of Catherine Tingley. Here's a pencil drawing of the Temple of Peace in the Academy by Leonard Lester. Another backcountry scene by Leonard Lester. Reginald Machel carving. We already have this Machel chair. We've repeated this cycle of life and death by Marion. Some more Morris Braun paintings. And Alice Pierce studied with Morris Braun and did a lot of the illustrated small greeting cards for Catherine Tingley. Same subject, global mythology, symbolism, and art, Catherine Tingley's Lomaland. And we have more text in the beginning. I reviewed here, I'm going to skip through this fairly quickly, just Catherine Tingley's background in New England Transcendentalism, grew up in Massachusetts. Key points of New England Transcendentalism definitely influenced her direction toward theosophy and infused her theosophical view, and vice versa. I'm going to skip through these things as we're mostly. And again, Tingley changed the name of the Theosophical Society, which she inherited, in the split that took place in 1896 from after William Q. Judge in America. And It became the universal brotherhood in Theosophical society. Her idea was to make theosophy intensely practical, but in terms of service and outreach. Her theme, an injury to one is an injury to all. I'm going to into the art a little bit quicker here. So this is the Path again by Reginald Mitchell. Currently at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society, Altadena. It was in the headquarters building, so survived the fire. Thank goodness. It's a very large canvas carved frame, etc. So the Machel's painting of the path very much follows the theosophical diagram of the principles. So we have universal spirit at the top, spiritual soul, human soul, animal soul, astral body, life essence, and body. So in many ways, the symbolism of his painting follows this kind of theosophical paradigm. Or more simply, body, soul, and spirit, and then the pathway of evolution through inner transformation. Well, here, Machel, the path is the way by which the human soul must pass in its evolution to full spiritual self-consciousness. The supreme condition is suggested in this work by the great figure whose head in the upper triangle is lost in the glory of the sun above, and whose feet are in the lower triangle in the waters of space, symbolizing spirit and matter. His wings fill the middle region, representing the motion or pulsation of cosmic life, while within the octagon are displayed the various planes of consciousness through which humanity must rise to attain perfect manhood. And then multiple symbols. At the top is winged Isis, mother or oversoul. I won't read the whole analysis here he gives. With more details. He says here on one side, two women climb, one helped by the other, whose robe is white and whose flame burns bright as she helps her weaker sister. Near them, a man climbs from the darkness. He has money bags hung at his belt, but no flame above his head. And already the spear of a guardian of the fire is poised above him, ready to strike the unworthy in his hour of triumph. Not far off is a bard whose flame is veiled by a red cloud, and who lies prone, struck down by a guardian's spear. But as he lies dying, a ray from the heart of the Supreme reaches him as a promise of future triumph in a later life. On the other side is a student of magic following the light from a crown, ambition held aloft by a floating figure who has led him to the edge of the precipice over which for him there is no bridge. He holds his book of ritual and thinks the light of the dazzling crown comes from the Supreme, but the chasm awaits its victim. By his side, his faithful follower falls unnoticed by him, but a ray from the heart of the Supreme falls upon her, also the reward of selfless devotion, even in a bad cause. Lower still, in the underworld, a child stands beneath the wings of the foster mother and receives the equipment of the night, symbols of the power of the soul, the sword of power, the spear of will, the helmet of knowledge, and the coat of mail, the links of which are made of past experiences. It is said in an ancient book, the path is one for all, the means to reach the goal must vary with the pilgrims. And it's, from multi traditions. He has Sanskrit Om at the bottom. And then the saying he says here, if wisdom thou wouldst gain, be strong, be bold, be merciful, but when thou hast attained, then let compassion speak. Renounce the goal, return to earth, a savior of mankind.
Uh-oh.
Here you have this many infused ideas of global mythology, religion, and culture at the time through Machel's understanding of some theosophical inspirations at that period as well. And his take on his own art piece, I think, each person could write their own mythic story in viewing this kind of artwork. So here also just the theme, is the warrior of compassion. Well, the Theosophists at the time, especially in that tremendous time of transition and change in the end of the 19th century into the early 20th century, I think not just the Lomaland Theosophists, but all the theosophical inspired groups were very much on a mission. They really felt they were an instrumental spiritual force for a new cycle beginning. This led to a tremendous amount of activity and creative effort in all the groups. And in the Lomaland groups, again, with Catherine Tingley, there was a great emphasis on the expressive arts, music, drama, art, and literature. We have, again, from before, this Cycle of Life and Death by Marion Lester. Some symbolism ideas from Henry T. Edge, student of Blavatsky, came to Lomaland. This is his idea, take on the idea of the triangle or trinity, which was instrumental central in the symbology in the Blavatsky Secret Doctrine and other writings. And also from world religions, in Christianity and also in Hinduism, as the Sri Yantra on the right corner here. So Edge writes, eternity stands at the head of every cosmogony and theogony. It really represents the limits of our thought. Everything that we know of in this world is dual, a pair of opposites, yet we are compelled to think of unity as underlying every duality. We find at the head of cosmogenesis the one life, a monad or unity, from which springs a duality of spirit and matter. This duality springs from a unity which contains both, the spirit matter or unitary source of all. And here we have the symbolism in Blavatsky's personal coat of arms, and then that became the theosophical symbol, which merged, again, multicultural, as an Egyptian Ankh in the center, the six-pointed star, an Ouroboros, an Om at the top, and a swastika in the circle on the top. Of course, this is the swastika from Eastern Indian source and pre-World War II Nazi German use of the swastika, where it was co-opted more or less. Swastika symbol of universal motion and dynamic energy. Gordon Plummer elaborated a lot on the interlacing triangles in his book, Mathematics of the Cosmic Mind. It's more details on Marion Lester's avatar and initiation. If Eldon, if you're still there, I believe you took this photo.
It looks familiar. I took pictures of 2 or 3 of her paintings while we visited her in Mission Beach one time. And I also bought 2 paintings from her, one of Peruker and another of a young girl that had been featured in, or inspired by a young girl's picture in Look magazine, or Life magazine rather.
Wow, very
But
interesting.
yeah, it's from a couple slides I took from that visit.
Anyway, I'm very happy and grateful that you took those photos because we don't know what happened to this painting. It's quite unusual. So it shows the symbolist influence throughout in the Lomaland artists. So in her later years, Marion painted this. She was in her 80s when she painted this, I'm pretty sure. So you have the Buddha in the background, lotus, cross, planets, esoteric astrology, caduceus, angelic beings, nature, birds, flowers, and elements, male and female energies, androgynous beings. Child is born from the lotus, background, water symbol. Which this for her was a symbolic painting of the inner process of the theosis described and de Prucker elaborated on of initiation into higher consciousness. Back to Machel again. This is from the 1890s, Adam and Eve. And here's the Lakshmi water nymph painting by Machel. This is a very, most of his paintings are very large canvases. This was a very tiny, maybe 10 by 12 painting. And what happened to it, I'm not sure. Maybe there was more than one. Also, there's more than one version of this. The lotus symbol was pervasive at Lomaland and amongst all the theosophical groups. The lotus was a very broadly used symbol, not only amongst theosophists, but it became so in the kind of Egyptian revival art of the time, not just from India, but also the Egyptian motifs from Egyptian religion. It's highly symbolic of transformation, the lotus of the roots in the mud in the water, and then growing up with the flower to the sun. So the seeds, even before they germinate, the image of the plant that will become is already present. And they saw it as a very universal symbol, Egyptian, Buddhist, China, Japan, Egypt. Here's an Egyptian motif with the Egyptian lotus, embryonic lotus seed. Henry T. Edge equates it to the Christian use of the Easter lilies. Pictures of the Annunciation, Gabriel appears to the Virgin holding them in his hand, typifies fire and water, the two creative principles. This is the same idea as that of the lotus in the hand of the Bodhisattva, who announces to Mahamaya the birth of the Buddha. Osiris and Isis were represented in association with the lotus. The lotus symbolizes the emanation of the objective from the subject, divine ideation passing into concrete form. In the first chapter of Genesis, it is said, and God said, let the earth bring forth the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind whose seed is in itself. So Edge is interpreting that as referring to the lotus seed, which is very interesting. So again, at Lomaland, here we have the lotus motif on the podium in the picture. Music group, the children were called Lotus Buds. Serpent symbolism, the Ouroboros, serpent swallowing its tail, very important religious symbol, symbolizing renewal and purification. Serpent shown swallowing its tail, Dr. Edge writes, emblem of the return of cycles upon themselves and the union of ends and beginnings. It's a great, very large canvas painting of Machel did in the 1890s, The Dweller on the Threshold. It's an unusual story. There may be two copies of this, but it's known now, at least for one of them is. So in maybe about a dozen or so years ago, this painting came up for auction in Europe. And the great-grandchildren of Reginald Machel have maintained a large collection of his artwork and try and keep an eye out for things. And one of them noticed that this was up for auction, and they were traveling in Europe at the time, and they just kept track of it, and they were just determined to purchase it and kept bidding. There was another bidder on it. I don't know what the price was, but they ended up getting the painting. It's a very large painting, about 6 or 7 feet tall also. And then the curious part about it is where the painting had been. So the painting had been for decades in Copenhagen in a pizza parlor restaurant. No one really realizing the significance of the painting, and how it got there is anyone's guess. Now it's with the Machel family in the United States. This is about the symbolism of the dweller on the threshold. This is a big subject. Varel talking about relating it to the inner transformational struggle in the Bhagavad Gita. The term dweller on the threshold comes from a novel by Bulwer Lytton, and his novel Zanoni. It's a symbolic idea of inner purification, struggling through one's interior obstacles, made in a very Victorian kind of way. There are many different ways to look at this. Here's another great painting, The Prodigal by Reginald Machel. This was on display at San Diego State University for a while, on loan from the San Diego Historical Society. It is gifted to the San Diego Historical Society by Iverson L. Harris, and is on display at currently in San Diego and Balboa Park. Hand-carved frame, fairly large painting, not as huge as the path. Mitchell quotes from the divine Pimander of Hermes, the knowledge of it is a divine silence and the rest of all the senses. The color palette that Mitchell uses, one could especially see it in this painting. I don't have it elaborated in detail, but he's following Blavatsky's ideas on color correspondences here that she elaborates in her esoteric instructions. And one of the curators at the San Diego History Museum, who has a background in art, has noted that the color palette of the Lomaland artists is unique and similar. This is something I never would have noticed. But with an eye to that, she felt that the color palette of Leonard Lester, Morris Braun, and Reginald Macher have a similarity that's very unique, and it influenced other artists throughout San Diego at that time. It's a very curious and interesting idea. So here's Machel's commentary on the prodigal. Human soul, leaving the mansion of his father in heaven, has wandered to the far land of earth. There he has squandered his spiritual patrimony in riotous living and is reduced at last to feed the swine. The swine in the parable are they who, with their hands bent earthward, feed their mind on soulless knowledge of material things. Prodigal, condemned to feed others with such food, is fain to fill his belly with the husks the swine did eat. That is, to fill his mind with the dead letter knowledge of the bookworm. At last he turns, saying, I will arise and go to my Father, that Father which is in heaven, and rising above his dark surroundings, freed from the sense which have held him down. He bathes in the undying light. The knowledge of it is a divine silence in the rest of all the senses. This is Machel's carved the doors to the temple at Lomaland. These are enormous, 12 feet tall, carved of solid oak. Interesting story, they had been lost after Lomaland, the temple remained, but in the early 1950s, the buildings were no longer in use, and there had been a fire that had burned part of the temple, and so the building was torn down. And then everyone tried to find out what happened to the temple doors, and it could never be found because they weren't damaged in the fire. Iverson Harris, my father, my parents looked for them. No one could find them. Then in the late 1960s, my father got a phone call from California Western University that the groundskeeper had found something underneath a building that had become brought to the campus in the early 50s and used as a chapel. It was a building brought up from the government buildings on the Point Loma. So underneath the building were the temple doors. I went with my father. I was about 16 years old and crawled underneath a very small crawl space. And here were these huge doors that had been slid in there somehow. So they were rescued at that point and brought to the Presidio Park in San Diego initially. You see at the top is also the Blavatsky symbol of the wreath and key, and we'll go into that next here, I think. Oh, this is currently on display at San Diego Historical Society. All the art from the temple doors over to the great painting called The Bard by Machel are Lomaland artists. This will be on display for quite a lot longer, maybe even another year or more. The big change, as time has gone on, the temple doors were put away for decades and not on display. Now the San Diego Historical Society has them up, and this is in a larger display of the art history of San Diego. They consider the temple doors to be the most outstanding art piece in the history of art in San Diego, and it'll be up permanently ongoing into the future. The photo on the right showing them in place in the building. I had the doors restored and oiled carefully as well recently. Here's the symbol. This was an embossed raised letterhead monogram showing the Blavatsky symbols that are in the top of the doors. Same as in Blavatsky's ring symbolism. Then interlacing triangles, the Sanskrit sat, meaning absolute reality or essence, key with the ring. And the actual ring is the symbol of sat with the interlacing triangles. And the Ouroboros serpent. Temple doors, as Tristan and Isolde from Celtic mythology. It was viewed by Machel and Catherine Tingley as symbolic of a future idealized humanity and symbolic of the inner union and balance of masculine and feminine qualities. It's another art piece Marion Lester did at Lomaland. It's very small, like 4-inch in diameter, wooden dish. She got the wooden dish from Catherine Tingley and painted this incredibly intricate Vairochana Buddha from Japanese Shingon Buddhism, kind of lacquer ware piece. She told us she used a brush that had one hair on it for a lot of this detail. Questions? That's the end.